It's time right now for the David Feldman Show. So get your ears on right, buckle in real tight.
Joining us are the Hirschenfelds. Dr. Philip Hirschenfeld is a real Freudian psychiatrist. He is the real deal. His son is not. Ethan Hirschenfeld is not the real deal.
I'm not even a real Freudian patient.
Ethan Hirschenfeld is not a real Freudian patient or psychiatrist. His alter ego, Dr. Samuel Benjamin, is the author of Today Is Now. Go buy Today Is Now. It has the Feldman guarantee.
Yes.
You buy this book and it doesn't change your life, I will reimburse you. Who is Dr. Samuel Benjamin? This is your
Dr.
alter
Samuel
ego?
Benjamin is the founder and chief emotional officer of the New York American Institute of Eclectic Modality Therapy, which has its headquarters in my apartment. Dr. Benjamin had plans for a headquarters in that. There's a very big empty space you might have seen on First Avenue, south of the UN. It's an entire city block.
Yes.
Dr. Benjamin has plans, but no funding to build a giant international center for his work, to promote his work, to promulgate his work, to carry out his work. But there's no money. No one's interested yet. So it's still just a hole in the ground. So
let me ask Dr. Philip Hirschenfeld a question about the land, the empty lot next to the UN, which has been there since I was a kid. Is there anybody over the age of 95 who lives in New York, who might be of a certain ethnic persuasion, who doesn't insist that they could have bought the land where the UN was built? It seems to me everybody I know over the age of 95,
which is me,
could have bought the land upon which the UN was built.
I actually had a deposit in on it.
You know, it was where all the slaughterhouses were. So before it was the UN, that's where all of the animals were slaughtered. So that entire stretch just smelled like cow blood.
What does that tell you?
Well, I don't know.
That the UN is on the site of a former slaughterhouse.
Yeah, there's a lot of animals were killed right there, that whole stretch.
Yeah,
that's where all those
very symbolic
trains pulled in from.
You know, the UN is a great organization.
It is.
It would be nice if the United States joined it.
Yeah.
And obeyed it.
We have cafeteria. The UN, boy, you can get anything there. No, I've never been.
Did you do Model UN?
What's that?
Did you do Model UN when you were a kid? Because we did Model League of Nations.
Yeah, I had a Lego set. That was the closest.
Okay. I was going to do a joke about Model League of Nations.
I heard from somebody who worked for that august institution that they do absolutely nothing and everybody's just hanging around till they're vested in their pension.
That's a malcontent. That's absurd. I want to know who that person is. Who is that rat? I know people who've worked there who do work there. They're doing God's work.
They really are. It would be nice if the United States did what.
Before we tackle the big subjects today, I did want to just suggest a moment of silence for Paco Rabanne.
Yes.
And Burt Bacharach.
Yes.
I feel like those two should have collaborated. Now it's too late. On a fragrance or a song.
Yeah, they were both sweet. Burt Bacharach was pretty amazing. Now, as an opera singer, what can you tell us? It always amazes me that in a former life, you sang opera. Did you, Dr. Philip Hirschenfeld, when he was growing up, did you ever imagine that your son would sing opera?
That was a very late I mean, not late, but it was, post teenage years, and it just exploded. And I loved every minute of it and went to various spots in the world to hear him.
When did you realize Ethan was a genius?
No, come on.
I use the word. No, seriously. When did you realize he was absolutely brilliant?
Let's get back to the important.
No, let's get back. Hang on. I want to ask you.
Hold on. Paco Rabanne. I want to say something about it. I didn't have any inklings towards becoming an opera singer or anything like that till after college, really, when I was studying with a teacher, an acting teacher, who gave me some exercises, some vocal exercises. But I did have earlier attractions in association with Paco Rabanne, namely.
Who is he for the ignorant among us?
Paco Rabanne was a designer who passed away at the advanced age of 88 the other day.
Okay.
He was a
He made
revolutionary
colognes. Wasn't there like a Paco Rabanne cologne?
Well, that's the thing. For my bar mitzvah, among the gifts I got, I still have it. I posted a picture of it on Facebook. I have a set of the cologne and the aftershave, the Paco Rabanne.
I think that's Paco
1982.
Rabinowitz.
Well, I think I probably did assume that it was just a Jewish name that was short. Because like all of the brands, my maternal grandfather, he had a shirt company, and they made these knockoff shirts that they would sell at places like Alexander's and Gimbals and that kind of thing. And they all had fake European names. So they were all made by some guy on 33rd Street, but they all had some pseudo-European name. So Paco Rabanne, you're absolutely right. It really sounds like a fake name. But I still
How shocked were you when you found out that Vidal Sassoon was an Israeli?
Right.
That was less shocking. Tight jeans.
I was shocked that Vidal Sassoon was
So
an
that stuff you have should be a collector's item now.
Yeah, I looked it up on eBay. I think it's worth $20.
Excellent.
It was 12 in 1982. But who are these perverted relatives who are giving a newly minted 13-year-old a bottle of cologne and aftershave? That is inappropriate in so many ways. No man ever should be wearing cologne. Cologne is disgusting. Just end of story.
It used to be a thing back in the day.
But it's gross. But for a 13-year-old, I mean, come on. Okay.
Were there any condoms in the package also?
Not that I know of.
Oh, okay.
I was watching the Nancy Pelosi hagiography on HBO that the daughter did. You know, as far as a love letter to your parent, you can't do any better than Alexandra Pelosi's documentary about Nancy. And one of the things you do get a sense of is that Paul Pelosi, who is looking more and more like an Orthodox Jew these days. Sorry. I don't know if you saw him at the State of the Union, but
Rev Pelosi.
He's got the black hat on now. So what was I talking about? Oh, so she has collected video of the Pelosi's and the family growing up. They're in Italy or they're celebrating some kind of birthday and they pour champagne. Nancy Pelosi's grandchildren are allowed to sip champagne, to sip wine.
Italians do that.
7 years old.
From a very early age, yes.
Yeah.
And
in fact, if you're in Italy and you see a mother who's breastfeeding, their breasts are actually labeled white or red. It's totally natural over there.
So can we stand in judgment of that?
We can, but we can stand in judgment of anything, and we do. And I think the verdict is out on whether that's good for the child, bad for the child. There are all sorts of.
The problem is if the baby it depends if the baby's driving later that day. Because you got to take the keys away from the baby if you're going to let him have the wine. That's the main thing.
Well, it's probably safer than Grandpa Paul Pelosi driving.
Yeah.
So I don't approve. I was told that Jews, the myth about Jews not being alcoholics is in fact a myth, and that it starts at their bar mitzvahs, that they learn that there's always an uncle who says, "Come here, boy chick, and have some of this."
Yeah, I don't think that those ethnic stereotypes when it comes to drinking are necessarily true. However, when it comes to cologne, very true.
I knew a guy who used to drink cologne. He was he was such a raging alcoholic. He would drink Vitalis, which was a hair thing with a lot of alcohol in it.
Tonic.
Kitty Dukakis did that. I thought, but you were making a joke. Drink cologne, like it's not healthy to drink alone.
Oh,
right?
That's funny. He was not making that joke, but that's funny.
You were not making the joke.
I was not.
I thought you were making a joke. It's not healthy to drink cologne. Okay. So we have some questions from listeners.
Okay.
One of our listeners.
We have listeners?
We have people stuck in their car and they need to keep both hands on the wheel and they cannot fast forward to another podcast. This is a question. Does the mind have control over the body? Can we cause illness in our bodies or cure ourselves with our psyches? For example, positive thinking, strong spiritual beliefs. And I'm going to ask Dr. Herschenfeld, a real psychiatrist.
Okay. There is actual scientific evidence that chronic stress, which is a brain phenomenon, affects the body in all sorts of different ways. And the less stressed you are in your life, in general, the healthier you are. So the answer is yes. And if you can lower that level of stress, I'm not a big fan of positive thinking. I don't know if that actually works, but maybe it does for some people. But if you can lower that stress, it's probably good for your body in general.
Absolutely. And let me just follow up on that. What happens is when you are stressed, a hormone gets released by your pituitary gland. I believe it's called Clearasil. I might be saying that wrong, but the Clearasil starts coursing through your veins and it can cause all sorts of problems. While clearing up your acne, it will cause heart problems. It can cause nerve problems. It can cause problems in your toes, in your earlobes.
Cortisol, I think. Is it cortisol?
Cortisol, that's right.
Cortisol.
Yeah, that's correct. Cortisol.
So I've been rubbing the wrong ointment on my face.
Yeah, but you're keep doing what you're doing because your skin looks great.
We think stress is, some of us are led to believe that stress means we're productive, we're working, we're important, right? We're in demand. I don't have time to sleep. We take pride in being anxious and stressful.
Yeah, it's very hard to
American life.
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
It's hard to sit around and do nothing. Although I've figured out how. I've been doing quite a bit of it. So if anyone needs any tips on how to do that. But the funny thing is you can sit around and do nothing and then feel stressed about that.
Uh-huh.
So we have an incredible capacity to generate that feeling. And here's something I learned, which is that if you're having an experience that's genuinely dangerous, like you're actually being threatened, say by a wild animal or your landlady or who knows what, or if you're thinking a scary thought, you still get that release of cortisol. It's the same. Your body doesn't distinguish between those two things. So what I'm saying is you should just stop thinking, avoid your landlady. Just take those two steps.
Dr.
Basically, what I'm saying is get a mortgage because then you don't have a landlady.
What are you saying?
I don't know.
Dr. Herschenfeld, do people get cured or do they just get older? Because I've noticed as I get older, a lot of things that went on in my head are beginning to disappear. Maybe because I can't remember them.
Probably.
But there's also, am I gonna, why should I?
It's called wisdom. You do accumulate wisdom as you get older. And that affects some of the nonsense that drove you earlier in life. Oh, no,
I'm so sorry. Go on.
No, you go on.
No, you go on.
No, it's a combination of wisdom and exhaustion. It's a powerful cocktail.
Exhaustum, I think is what it's called. Exhaustum.
I heard an amazing quote this week. If anyone, if you haven't heard it, definitely listen to it. It's David Remnick from the New Yorker interviewing Salman Rushdie. The first interview he's given since he was attacked 4 or 5 months ago. And I think Rushdie said, apropos of sort of looking back at his career, in your youth, you have to fake wisdom. and in your older age, you have to fake energy. I really like
Are
that.
there people who are born with wisdom? Are there certain dogs? No?
Nah. It takes life experience.
Haven't
Some
you ever
people-
heard that they say this dog is an old soul or this kid is an
I've heard
old
that.
soul? You've never heard that
I've
expression?
heard all sorts of bullshit, but
But what about that? Isn't that biblical phrase about the out of the mouths of babes? What
Yeah.
comes? Is it the truth?
Off come pacifiers, I think.
I think it's truth. So there
older
is that.
people in general, as you get older, you do get happier. This is a well-studied phenomenon. That doesn't mean everybody, but as a trend.
So I'm young at heart, is basically since I'm so miserable, it means I have a long life ahead of me.
However,
Yeah,
you
go
might
ahead.
be enjoying that misery tremendously and not even know it.
Why would older people be happier? Because I do see it. You do see older people.
Basically, because the reduced fare on the bus. It's very exciting. I've seen people, they just really they light up when they see that they're paying half for the same stuff that other people. I think that's what it is mostly.
Why would you be old? Why would you be happy that you're older?
Because your drives are less intense. And it's our drives, it's our desires that make us unhappy.
Wow.
But
They don't-
don't the drives also make you happy? That those extremes of
No.
all those excitements? You sound like a stoic.
They make you happy when they are satisfied temporarily.
Right.
You're a Buddhist, for Christ's sake.
Like you guys keep mishearing. As I've explained, I'm a nudist. I'm not a Buddhist. I said it once and now I've been labeled.
When did you realize? I was re-listening in the car to him.
Yeah.
When did you realize he's a genius? Seriously, when did you go, this kid is special? He can't look at him. Look at him. He can't take it.
You can't
That's
say
another thing. Special. Yes.
he was a
Yes.
very good kid, very smart, very funny. As the youngest, I think often
Oh,
funny.
he's the youngest. I didn't know that.
Funny is the weapon of the youngest.
It's interesting. I'm not only the youngest of my siblings, but I'm also the youngest if you include the parents also.
And grandparents.
So I was really, really the youngest in that house. I mean, really the youngest.
It's a good thing Leonardo DiCaprio wasn't your father. Then you wouldn't be the youngest.
Yeah. Oh, he took a lot of heat for if he was. Apparently he wasn't. But if he was dating that 19-year-old, it's so bizarre that people come. I mean, he's a movie star. He likes 19. That's why there are laws. You can't also excoriate the guy for then dating a woman who's a year above. I mean, if that's his predilection,
Well,
what's the problem?
I think there's some jealousy. I also think there's something, in order to please my female listeners, let me just pander and say I think there's something lacking in a man pushing 50. who
Sure.
wants to
No.
seek the company of a young woman. I'm just pandering now.
No,
to the listeners.
absolutely. No, I'm not saying that it's the greatest choice or it shows that he's the most evolved person emotionally or anything, but it's not, you can't. I mean, you can't.
And what about Fatty Arbuckle?
Innocent.
You think so?
Oh, he was.
Was he?
Yeah, he was innocent.
Okay. I withdraw my charge.
And had he withdrawn that, he was set up. And by the way, go watch his silent movies. He was unbelievably funny.
Yes, he was.
So it is the drives that make us miserable. Desire is suffering.
Well, yeah.
And yet we can't help ourselves. And we
Because
we can.
Oh, we hear from the nudists now.
how can we?
Well, I think, again, I'm just quoting people more enlightened than myself. But the thing is, I said jokingly before to stop thinking, but that's the way to do it. Because the thinking just instantly gets into what do I want? What do I want? What do I want? And what don't I have? And how could I get that? And then you're back into that cycle of misery. So if you can just basically trick yourself into jumping off of that merry-go-round And one way to do it is just by, again, meditation is an incredible tool that I don't practice because it's impossible. I find it just very, but that's the thing. If you can just sit still and look at the wall, or sit still and focus on your breath, and just every time you get distracted from that, just bring yourself back to it. I can see everyone's falling asleep. The second you talk about meditation, it's very it's soporific. It's like getting hit on the head with a hammer to hear someone talk about meditation. But apparently that's how it
Paul
works.
Pelosi.
Yeah, great meditation.
All right, I won't do it. I won't do the. He's okay, right? He's not. There's no brain damage, right?
We don't know. But as an elder statesman myself, my sleep, it's not awful terrible, but it's affected. And what do I do at 2:30 a.m. when I wake up?
Gamble.
I meditate.
Oh.
I do. I concentrate on my breath in and out. And after a while, I don't even know how long the while is because I fall asleep.
It was interesting because you were saying in and out, and your hands were going the opposite way. I feel like you're doing it wrong. This is in.
I'm dyslexic.
You're beyond that.
By now.
Yeah.
The drive. I know it's hard to believe, but I'm driven. I mean, I don't have anything to show for it, but I'm driven, and I get up every morning and I have things to do. But if somebody were to look at me, they'd say, really, this is what you're perseverating over all day. This is nonsense. And then I go outside in New York City and everyone has the same identical look on their face. They are not smiling, and they are ruminating and chewing over their drives.
David, did you ever hear the word projection?
Yes.
You are clearly projecting your own face onto all of those other people, because it's not possible that everybody has the same whatever. We are all unique.
It does feel like that. Ethan, doesn't it feel like that in New York, where everybody
can feel like that? But I know what you're describing, because I used to have that same feeling. Especially if you live in Manhattan and you're not a banker, or if you live in Manhattan and you're not a lawyer, you can really. I found that very hard to do, because you do have that feeling that everyone is on that path, and their agendas are completely full, and their plans are full,
right,
and their weekends are full, and their wallets are full, and everything's full, and they have that look. And I found it incredibly alienating. That's why I had to move to Brooklyn.
Now,
and then all those people moved to Brooklyn after me. So,
when I was
their cup of misery is also full. That's what you don't understand, because they're also human.
Yeah. Well, here is an experiment that can be very effective. And we were talking about how to get out of that whole thing about the drives making you crazy. Yeah. I find this sometimes it actually works. If you just put a smile on your face and then actually go out and just smile at people on that morning walk. It's much easier if you have a dog, but just actually smiling and greeting people, and then having that feeling, trying to cultivate that feeling that you're not one of these 21st century humans who's on this terrible escalator to nowhere, but instead, like you're an ape, or you're a dog, or you're a frog, which is, I mean, we are very similar to those things. Forgetting all of the civilization and the jobs and the taxes, we are also just creatures. And if you can just try to engage on that level, and you really can do it, it's very simple. If you look someone in the eyes, you look a stranger in the eyes, not for too long, because that can feel threatening. But if you look the stranger in the eyes and smile, you can actually try to tap into that, just being a happy animal.
I'm glad you finally figured that out, because that's just me naturally.
Finally? That's so obnoxious. Finally.
I chat with people constantly, smile at them, make Google.
Don't go chatting with them. That's creepy. I'm just talking about smiling. No, I agree. Yeah, chatting with strangers. That's
dogs. Also, I always chuck the dog under his chin, and
without consent, though. I've seen you.
Without consent, yes.
Yeah.
I've been bitten twice, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. You do want to get consent from the owner, and then you want to just let the dog sniff your hand. That's the thing. You don't want to reach for it.
Okay, let me go back. Let me go back to drives, because you said something that resonated with me. Happiness is not being driven.
Yeah.
Our drives are the source of
being satisfied, which can happen either because you fulfilled a drive, like you're hungry, and then you ate something, and then you're happy.
Okay.
Or if you find a way to manage your drives, because drives are necessary, by the way. If you did not have a drive to eat, you would starve to death.
Okay. A parent, so Ethan, you have a son who is obviously driven. I won't go over his resume, but he's pretty successful. If a parent came to you and said, I have a son, he's happy, but he's not doing well in school, but he's happy. He's just not driven. He doesn't work. He's a C student. He has friends, but he's happy. And I'm worried about him. What would you tell the parent? But he's happy. My kid is happy.
Meth. Just a slight, not a lot, just a little, sprinkle it on the Cheerios. Just a little.
What culturally, there are certain cultures.
Yes. Where that's not okay.
Where that's not okay. Just to have a happy kid.
Right.
I don't think, I've said this, my mother and father never bragged that I was in love. My son is so happy.
They had nothing to brag about, David.
Give them something. So,
no, you're right. Though that would be incredible. That would be incredibly enlightened. I know through someone. This is the counter example to that. A New York parent whose kid has already been accepted to a college, and then the parents are basically grade grubbing on behalf of this kid to try to help him get into an even better college through this just driven minor form of petty corruption, grade grubbing, lobbying. I mean, it's the opposite of that. The message you're sending to a kid is, you're not good enough. You're probably not going to be good enough. Without us, you're definitely not good enough. It's all a
Varsity Blues.
Right. This was like miniature. This is like junior Varsity Blues. So anyway, yeah, the opposite would be to tell the kid, that's great. You got into a school. That's great. And we're really happy for you. And the key is that you're curious about something and you keep learning. So, but yeah, that's a rare parent that,
I have a friend who had a son, and the son was a senior in high school, and they were talking to a eminence grise in psychoanalysis, a really older, respected woman. And they said, oh, yeah, so-and-so just got into this very good college. And she turned to the boy and said, college is about fucking.
Wow.
Well,
who shared that story?
The father of the boy told me.
Wow.
There's a great story about Tallulah Bankhead meeting the Marx Brothers. And Chico walked up to Tallulah Bankhead and said, after this party, I'm going to drag you into my car and fuck the hell out of you in the back seat. And she said, and so you shall, young man, and so you shall.
Okay, gentlemen, I have to go teach a course now, but you can carry on till midnight for all I care.
Thank you. This was, he disappeared. Wow.
He's not messing around.
That was great.
Yeah, that guy's on a schedule.
Yeah, that was great. Ethan Hirschenfeld, thank you for joining us. Thank you. And fun. Let's plug your book. And are there any gigs?
And let's plug a gig. So the book is Today Is Now.
Today Is Now.
And I want to plug this gig. This is a terrific guy named Todd Montezzi. and Todd is a New York comedian. And I'm going to do his show on March 11th. I want to tell you about it. It's at a weird time of day. In case it's like 5 p.m. Hold on. I'm getting it. I'm pulling it up. This is the worst plug in history. Todd, where is your, there it is. It's called UG Comedy. UG, UG. That's UG exclamation point.
How do you plug? You're plugging.
Plug ugging. Todd Montezzi. The show is at a place called Secret Pour, like pour, Secret Pour.
Right.
On DeKalb Avenue. Oh my God, look at this. Sunday, the 12th. I had the date wrong. Sunday, the 12th at 3 p.m. I mean, this is a crazy show.
Right.
Sunday, the 12th of March at 3 p.m. in Bushwick. Come on, come to Brooklyn.
It's in March.
Comedy in March. Yeah.
March 13th.
March 12th. Yeah. I have a big show this Saturday night, but it's a private show. It's at a church in Queens. So I'm doing a full 45 minutes. So I've been pretty preoccupied. I haven't done that long a set in quite a while.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, have a good time. And how do people follow you? What do they do?
My website, ethanhershenfeld.com.
Listen to me. Right. You're a genius.
Thanks, dude. You too.
No, you really are. You are. I listened. I got in the car and listened, and I'm going to give you the greatest compliment I possibly can. You made me laugh so hard, I wished ill on you. That's how funny you are.
Thank you.
It's time right now for the David Feldman Show. So get your ears on right, buckle in.
Joining us is the Reverend Barry W. Lynn. For nearly a quarter of a century, he ran Americans United for separation of church and state. Besides being an attorney and a member of the Supreme Court Bar, he is an ordained minister in the United Church of, and I hope I'm pronouncing this properly, Christ?
You're really going back to that old joke.
Somebody
who requested it?
Dan.
What is it? Dan requested.
Dan requested. He says it's.
Where does he live?
Dan said.
Okay.
He says, "Yeah."
No, it's a good joke. He's wearing a little thin, but it's back now.
It's been 2 years since I did that joke.
No.
Yes, it has. I swore off it for Lent 2 years ago.
That's good. It was a good thing to swear off of. Have you now become a Christian? Because the Jewish community does not celebrate Lent.
No, I meant Lent, like I lent you money.
Oh, I see.
Lent that joke to somebody.
Yeah.
Interest.
Have you thought about writing anything for Congressman Santos? Like, specifically, if somebody like Mitt Romney comes up to you and says, you don't belong here, I think Santos ought to have a better rejoinder than just standing there like an idiot.
Yes.
You could write this stuff.
I want to talk to you about the State of the Union.
Yes.
I was watching Chelsea Handler on The Daily Show, and she had the greatest joke, which was Marjorie Taylor Greene shouted liar, and George Santos said, I'm right over here. Yes, yes. And I went, wow, that is a perfect joke. That is perfect.
It is.
For what she's trying to do on a late night talk show that's on at 7 p.m. That is, you cannot write a better joke for that medium than what she did. So anyway,
I concur.
Yeah.
I concur.
The State of the Union. Can I tell you what I thought?
Of course.
I thought that in terms of being the great communicator, he did a great job. Our healthcare system is a mess. I'm dealing with it, and I cannot believe how sinful it is, how we treat each other. And he's not pushing Medicare for all. Arctic, we're freezing to death. The eviction crisis has not been solved. But in terms of a television show, he put on a good television show. All right?
He did.
It was a good show.
He did. Yeah, it was a good show. It might have been a little shorter, but they never are shorter. And I did think I was very impressed by the fact that he was able to pick up on the heckling and deal with it in a pretty sophisticated fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good. 72% of the people watching it thought he did a good job, which is the highest rating I ever remember.
But only
in the modern president.
Only 72 people watched it.
It did have a decline in attendance over last year when more people watched, significantly more people watched.
The civility, is there some virtue to the misbehaving and the heckling? We watch it every week, Question Time in Great Britain. I always think, wow, you have to be so much sharper to be the Prime Minister of England than the President of the United States. We would get a better mind, a sharper mind, if we saw more heckling during.
Yeah. Well, there's a little, but in Britain, it's not heckling in the traditional sense. I mean, it really is asking tough questions of the Prime Minister. They do the same thing. Yeah, it's like a roast. Yeah. And it may not be as funny, but I've seen some pretty terrible roasts. Yeah. But I do think, I think he handled it very well. I think he did, in fact, convince people that he does want to run again.
Yes.
He does want to run again. I think he's preparing to make that announcement within the next few months, just to make sure that Democrats stop sniping and start figuring out what they can do to promote the ideas that there are people who are fabulously wealthy, who pay very few taxes. I think one of the best lines in the whole thing was when he said he wanted the billionaires' tax, because no billionaire should pay a lower percentage of their, I think he said, income. It's not quite true. His plan's a little more complicated than that, but then does a firefighter or a school teacher. Right. And that ought to be such a profoundly important statement to make. But historically, going back decades, if you ask people about taxing the rich, they all say, well, I'm not in favor of that, because they, in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, they believe that they, or at least their children, will all of a sudden be in the ranks of the wealthiest people in America. And then they or their kids might have to pay higher taxes. There's so little mobility between working class people and the wealthy that it never happens. I mean, there are anecdotal pieces of evidence, but the two anecdotes do not, as several people have said, create a finding.
I want to ask you, before we talk about House Republicans and the morning after pill, on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, we had Chris Hedges on the show. Yep. And he was, I believe he went to Harvard Divinity School. I think he's the son of a minister. I don't know if
I think you're right.
And so I get to ask one question per show. And they were talking about the Reverend Jeremiah Wright.
Yep.
And I asked him about the ministers, the reverends, the rabbis in America. Are they culpable for endless wars and the income inequality? Where are the Jeremiah Wrights? Where are the Jeremiads? Where are the prophets waving the Bible and telling Americans, you're going to burn in hell for allowing this? Are there ministers, rabbis, imams? Are there people saying, look, I mean, like, did you ever meet Jeremiah?
Oh, no, I was on a committee with him when I worked, and he worked for the United Church of Christ. So, yeah, I knew him reasonably well.
For the United Church of Christ.
He was on the commission. It was called then the Commission for Racial Justice, and he was its director for a number of years. Yeah, but he would not.
What denomination would he be?
He was a United Church of Christ member of the clergy.
Oh, so that's
Yes.
where Obama worshipped?
Well, I don't know that he actually worshiped in that church that Jeremiah Wright was in Chicago for a long time. But yes, we were. It was a trifecta of irritants at the time. Of course, was Jeremiah Wright and Barack Obama and Barry Lynn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Father, Son, and Holy
Ghost. Ghost. Oh my goodness, it's a ghost. But it's not a ghost. You know.
So his sermons, not God bless America, God damn America. If you listen to that sermon, it should be read in every school. They just took that one little snippet.
Sure.
But he was saying in that sermon, what we do to countries overseas and to ourselves, not God bless America, God damn America. What is the role the ministry should be playing in screaming from the mountaintops about income inequality and endless wars?
Well, first of all, there are people that are doing that, but you never see them on television. I had a friend, I may have mentioned her before. She used to run the Sex Information and Education Council of the United States, SECUS. Then she decided to become a Unitarian minister. And although she was frequently on shows, she was on the Today Show a lot, as soon as she became the Reverend, then nobody invited her anymore. When I used to do Fox News with how quickly we forget the jerk that Bill O'Reilly. Every once in a while, he would call all the time. And then once our communications guy said, Barry wants to talk about the law. And O'Reilly said, no. We got enough lawyers. We want to talk to him because he's a minister. And so, I did that. But the people, you cannot get on. Think of the amount of time given even to the few prominent African-American ministers out there who are making the case, except they don't conclude as you do, or maybe as Jerry Wright did, that you'll go to hell. Because most of us believe that's a concept that has little significance or meaning.
I've been thinking of just using my platform to tell Americans they're going to burn in hell.
Yeah.
According to the scriptures, the Old Testament and the New Testament, if your rabbi isn't going to tell you this, I will. You are going to burn in hell for this healthcare system. And I can't help it. When I'm on the phone, I'm helping someone with their health insurance. And it is an ongoing struggle. And I tell these people, you're going to burn in hell. And I know it's wrong. But when I'm on the phone with Aetna and Blue Shield, I tell these people they're going to burn in hell. Mm-hmm. And I think more people need to start directing that at the richest 1% and leave the transgender people alone. Stop telling young men and women they're going to burn in hell for masturbating, and start telling healthcare executives they're going to burn in hell for killing hundreds of thousands of Americans each year in the name of mammon.
Yes, do not move out of a healthcare system that you are in and move, say, to Massachusetts. Now, as you know, and many of the listeners know, my wife is a doctor and she's been on this show a number of times. But even there, to get appointments to see anyone has become a total nightmare.
Yes,
this and is where we're going. Well, if they give you one person and that person is not someone you feel very good about, then you have to get another person. You have to switch the programs. It's unbelievable. And you're right. And come to think of it, I don't know were you ever a Boy Scout?
No.
No. Well,
I've
the
been
Boy
in the
Scout
woods with older men before.
Hey, come on. Hey, there's something clear in the old versions of the Boy Scout handbook. They did specifically, since you're constantly going to issues of sex, masturbation was wrong. And you couldn't be a scout if you masturbated. And
I was learning how to tie a slip knot. That's all.
Yeah.
Maybe Lane can tell. But didn't the founder of the Boy Scouts have a Horatio Alger problem?
I don't know.
You know, Horatio Alger was a child molester. Did you know that?
Yes. I've heard that.
And I think,
but I'm going to just finish about the.
Oh, sorry.
99% of Boy Scouts reading that, if they ask the question, do you masturbate? 99% would admit it and therefore be thrown out of the Boy Scouts. And the 1% who said, I've never done it, would be thrown out for lying. That was a statistic.
If I were a Boy Scout and they asked me if I masturbate, I'd say you should check the jamboree on my chest. I don't think the Boy Scouts are. No. I don't approve of the Boy Scouts. So,
no, I don't either. But actually, my son was a Boy Scout, but we looked very hard to find a troop where it was boy directed, so that the young men there pretty much decided what to do, and where they did not discriminate against people on the basis of religion or anything else. And we did find such a place. It's very rare.
Yeah. So going back to the State of the Union, would this country be better served with a scold from a president where, you know, where people say things like the American people deserve better than this, and you have a president who says, no, I think you deserve exactly what we're giving you. You deserve this.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's exactly the way to go, but no, I get your point. And he should have been a bit angrier than he was. There's no question about that. And I don't think it would have hurt him. And I think maybe 73% of people would hear it. He has to be able to say, you know, folks, you're wrong about so many things. The climate is in crisis. The healthcare system makes no sense. And to say it as bluntly as that, and say there are half of you that know I'm right, and the other half of you say I'm wrong, and I'm not, and here's why.
Yeah. By the way, I was at office hours Friday night. It turned into a bitch and moan session about the healthcare system. There was one guest who said she had to wait 7 months to see a dermatologist. 7 months to see a dermatologist. Yep. I was thinking of doing a special office hours, maybe on a Saturday night, a town hall where we just listen to people complaining about the healthcare system and nobody offers any solutions. I found it very cathartic to hear other people just describe what a nightmare our healthcare system is, without solutions, without judgment, without saying, and this is why you need Medicare for all, just to hear people describe what this healthcare system is like, so we could bear witness to each other's suffering. What is the value in Christianity to bearing witness to other people's suffering, Reverend?
Well, there's a huge theological debate about that, because it's very easy to say, well, they say suffering, and then there are actually ministers who used to say, and if you're suffering, you should suffer more, because then you'll be even more in need of the help of Jesus. I mean, it's primitive. It is so difficult for me to even look at televised sermons on the internet, which I started doing, during COVID, because so many of them are they're just incredible. They're pointless. They say nothing, and they certainly don't help a person, whether that person is physically in the pews or watching on the internet. It's not helpful. It's just not helpful. I was on a webinar. I wasn't a participant in it, for something called Religion News Service, which really finally it got to the point where they convinced major networks for a while and major newspapers to treat religion like they treat the economy. And that is to have people who know what they're talking about exploring this phenomenon, which is of incredible significance to a huge number of people. And whether you believe religion is a good thing, or you believe, as Christopher Hitchens did, that it's a terrible thing, an evil thing, you should be able to explore that with at least the depth of financial analysts on CNBC or the Wall Street Journal. Right. And there was a very important figure, and he's in my book. We'll get to my book sometime. Okay. But David Anderson. He worked for United Press International. When United Press International started to fire lots and lots of people, he moved over to Religion News Service. And when he retired in 2004 to go out and live in rural Montana, everybody that said something about him said Dave Anderson was the person who convinced major papers and television and radio to talk about religion in a serious way. Not just have, there used to be a requirement, it's not really there anymore, that there was for licensees of radio and television stations an obligation to deal with issues of public concern. Part of it was the so-called fairness doctrine, which was not much of a burden. It didn't say you had to, mix, match every single thing being said by one person with somebody else. But it did make television interested in pursuing some issues, and to do so even with the clergy and other people with ethical interests, usually on Sunday mornings. Right. And there were great conversations on some of those shows. I mean, I remember doing one with the late John Conyers, who, of course, was an African-American congressman from Detroit. And we were talking about some military issues and relating to the Jimmy Carter pardon. And they tried to get somebody who would disagree with us. We were in complete agreement, but they couldn't get anybody. They don't have to get somebody to do that. But it made a difference. And it also showed people that on a Sunday morning, you could watch at that time the Billy Graham Hour, you could watch. But you also could see people who were expressing some of these deep concerns about the direction of the country and the way in which we can be better people, that we can do the right thing instead of the wrong thing. But those shows are all, I think, off the air. I don't know of any place that has them.
Let's talk about the morning after pill, and then we'll talk about what the Republicans should be investigating.
Yeah, well, the morning after pill.
What is the morning after pill?
It's it's actually two pills. Mifepristone is the first one, and you have to take that along with another pill, which name eludes me at the moment. But once you do that, this is a very safe pharmaceutical. It's been examined for 30 years, and it's got no serious side effects for virtually nothing. Every pill has some idiosyncratic downside. But once the decision in Hobbs was made, and we no longer have Roe versus Wade on the books, people have now started to think, well, what are the implications of the reasoning of Roe versus Wade? And of course, the reasoning, such as it was, of the majority of that court, was that the whole thing was wrong-headed from the start, because there is no constitutional right to privacy. The long-range goal of the religious right is not just to do away with abortions, but to do away with contraception. And because it's based on exactly the same arguments that were, taken by my friend Bill Baird in the contraceptive and then moved into the abortion
Is
issue.
that true, though? They really do. If you ask
Oh,
Judge Thomas, is this Griswold? Is that the...
yes. Well, Griswold was the one that said you couldn't. Connecticut had a law that even married couples could not obtain abortions. But the more difficult one was the one that Bill Baird himself brought. And that was a question of could unmarried people have access to contraception? That was a tougher case, but he won that case. And then he subsequently won a case on access to abortion for minors without parental consent. Because
I'm thinking of a joke. Republicans would be against abortion for the punchline is except in the case of marital rape, but I don't know what the setup is.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Except in the case of marital rape, we'll make
it. Doesn't sound like a great. We should actually talk to Bill Baird. He's 90. Yes. Oh, with me. Yes, he was. That's correct.
Yes.
Well, but Christina Page is this woman who wrote a wonderful book about a decade ago about how the women's movement saved America. And her argument was, we know they're against abortion, but look at this. The evidence is mounting that they are against contraception as well. And, I interviewed her when I was doing radio a couple times, but before you get to that, the Right to Life people who Right to Some Life people have another brilliant idea. We're not going to take away contraception yet, but we are going to try to make it illegal to prescribe or to transfer through the mails the morning after pill. So what did they do? They went, this is the worst example of forum shopping I've ever seen. This is, you want to find a judge that you think is going to be on your side.
Right.
So a group called the First Liberty Institute, which is out of Texas.
Sounds nice left wing, something.
It's nice and right wing. Yes. First Liberty is the liberty to take care of. So it's run by a guy that I used to have frequent run-ins with. And so here's what happened. So he decides that they should move this case, claiming that it's unconstitutional to prescribe this FDA-approved drug. It's unconstitutional because the Federal Food and Drug Administration made a mistake. So where do they go? They go to the Northern District of Texas, which has a single judge at the moment who used to work for the First Liberty Institute. He was their general counsel. Now he's the judge that they have picked. And this is a guy who believes that if he makes a judgment, and he's done some bad things in immigration context, it will be applied and should be applied to the entire country. Now, that sounds horrible. It's also about what do you do if it goes immediately to an appeal in the Fifth Circuit, which covers, of course, Oklahoma and Texas and a bunch of other red states? And the answer is they pretty much uphold anything that hurts American women or hurts immigrants. So then they'd have to take an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court. And I'm not sure that they would do that. I'm not sure the court's looking to do that maybe next year or the year after that. But I don't think they're looking to say, oh, yeah, and by the way, this FDA-approved drug, you can't get that either. You can't prescribe it and you can't send it in the mail. That's how nutty these people are. They do not care. You can, with the exception of our friend Rob Schenck, who's I had on the show too, they haven't changed their mind. They dig in. He's a pariah now, even though he was literally one of the top leaders of the anti-choice movement in America.
Right.
And, after he did the show, and of course he got a lot of
huge.
It became a huge show.
He testified before
the Judiciary Committee and basically said, I was setting up meetings between Supreme Court justices and huge Republican donors. And then he also said that he had been given information about the result in the Hobby Lobby case before it was out there. And the court, of course, said that's nonsense. And the Republicans said it was nonsense. But
what does that mean? I mean, you're a member of the Supreme Court bar.
Yeah.
I've been led to believe that you cannot lobby the Supreme Court. Can you lobby the Supreme Court? Can you?
No, you lobby them by filing friend of the court briefs, amicus briefs. You can have protests outside of the court.
You can invite, I know the Koch brothers invites them to speak at events. And
absolutely. No, there's plenty of that going on. But if you ask the Club for Growth or one of these right-wing religious groups that also tends to invite people like Clarence Thomas, they will say he's just talking to us. He's just talking to us.
And we don't know what speaking fees they're getting paid, right?
I don't think they get speaking fees for that because they get a lot of extra income in the summer months and on into early September before the court is back in session. And there they can go and raise a huge amount of money as a visiting professor somewhere, often not even in the United States. They don't have to
do financial disclosure.
No, they do not. They apparently are discussing over the last few months some kind of potential code of ethics for Supreme Court justices. But the last time somebody that knows something about it talked to me, said that they're just nowhere close to coming up with a solution.
HR 1 wasn't Nancy Pelosi's first bill in the 117th, 118th, 116th Congress, I believe.
Yeah, she did. And, of course, it passed the House. But, it is very difficult to convince people that that they should have a hand in discussing or regulating the conduct of another branch of government. I mean, because they certainly don't want the court telling them that much of anything that they do is unconstitutional. And then, of course, the presidents in the past have gotten away with virtually everything because the court doesn't step in or doesn't in the last 25 years. So that's bad. But they're going to...
All the problems that this country has. As I get older, and maybe I listen to Ralph Nader, all the solutions are in the Capitol. That the people who have appropriated our government want us to believe that nothing gets done in Washington, D.C., and that's anything but the truth. This government, Washington, D.C., works perfectly fine for the people who've taken it over. And
exactly,
if you control Washington, D.C., you control everything. I did the numbers. I think Washington is 1/3 of our economy. What Washington spends is 33% of the economy.
I don't know. That sounds a little high to me.
When you factor in, maybe it's including state and local, but
that could be. But it's
if you
these
control
are things
government, you control the future. And I love people on the left. I do. I'm a leftist.
Yep.
But you got to take over the government.
Of course you do.
Solution.
But, there were plenty of people who would characterize themselves as progressive who don't even want to expand the size of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, talk about who's in real charge. It is the Supreme Court. Right. Biden wants to do not enough, in my view, but wanted to do something about student loan debt. That's now before the court. I think it's incomprehensible that they will allow him to continue that program. They've
Right.
heard arguments. They'll make a decision probably in the late spring. But you control the court, you control everything. Even if they were to try to expand the court, there would be people coming up with so-called constitutional reasons why the expansion was not permitted. They have no knowledge. They have no moral center, with the exception of, the three people who vote the correct way on all of these social issues and all of these administrative issues. But you have got to do something. We have got to expand this court. And we have to give voting rights to the District of Columbia. There's 712,000 people. I think they're too fewer since we moved, but it's reprehensible that these people are called on as citizens of the country to serve in the military, to pay taxes, and they don't get any representation that's meaningful. I mean, God love her. I love Eleanor Holmes Norton. I've known her for decades, but she doesn't even get a vote on the House floor. We have no senators. We have no senators in Washington. There would be 2 Democrats. That's true. But, so be it.
What is the thinking that DC doesn't need representation? It's run by the federal government. Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's one of the arguments used, but it's just not persuasive. I mean, you got Wyoming has fewer people. I think Idaho has fewer people also. There are 2 other states that have fewer actual people living there than live in the District of Columbia. And it's talk about diversity. I mean, this is just in the neighborhood we left. I mean, it was set up as an African-American kind of enclave in Northwest Washington. It has lots of gay people, Hispanic people, Asian people, and that is a great example within the city of Washington, D.C., of the diversity that is throughout that city. And you got to do those. You have to do something that makes it clear that if you pay taxes and your kids are supposed to be serving in the military, that you damn well better get an actual representative and an actual 2 senators, just like Wyoming has 2 senators. There's no excuse.
We have veterans who were not citizens who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. They come back and they're still not given their citizenship.
That's right. No, that's absolutely right. Well,
let's talk about what the House Republicans should really be looking at.
Yeah, well, the House Republicans, I think, made a complete ass out of themselves yesterday when they were talking about Hunter Biden's laptop. Now, I thought that there probably was in Hunter Biden's laptop very damaging information. So the Republicans have been looking at all of the leaks and the hints and the evidence that they got from Elon Musk. They've been doing this for a year. And I thought they would really have something to crow about during the hearing earlier in this week. And they had nothing. I mean, he literally had nothing. There was no smoking gun. The only connection, which they claimed that they would be able to make between government law enforcement agencies and Twitter, was one example, the only example they gave that has any meaning. Apparently someone in the Justice Department, probably working on behalf of the people, including the president, said that there were certain pornographic images on Hunter Biden's laptop. They were being circulated, and somebody went to Twitter and said, this is an invasion of privacy. The guy doesn't want this. Take it down. And they did. But everything else, the they had nothing. And in fact, the witnesses, including Matt Taibbi, who, writes for Rolling Stone, and a couple of months ago had this big splash one Saturday morning where he said he had looked at some of the stuff that Elon Musk was indicating had happened to Twitter. But even he couldn't bring himself to honestly say under oath that he knew that there was anything that I thought might be there, like connections between Hunter Biden and his father's foreign policy decision making.
Right.
Nothing.
Okay, let me ask you some legal questions, because you are, in fact, a member of the Supreme Court bar. There is a laptop that is left by a crack addict at a repair shop. 30 days. If you leave it there for 30 days, you no longer own it. Right? Okay. Right. If you're a crack addict, would a judge with the proper lawyering rule in your favor and say, no, he was disabled, he couldn't pick up the laptop, this adhesion clause does not apply, it's still Hunter Biden's laptop?
Yes, I think you could make a credible argument about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
If it no longer belongs to Hunter Biden, and you are the owner of the computer repair shop, and according to the contract, you now own his computer, is it legal for you to go through the contents of that hard drive, or are you legally obligated to wipe it clean and then either try to sell it or use it for yourself? Are you allowed to go through a hard drive that belongs to a customer?
Yes, I think you are.
You are allowed to search somebody's...
Yeah, because you're not, remember, at that point, you're not a law enforcement official. There's no constitutional claim that could be raised about you violating some principle of search and seizure, because it's just a guy in a computer store. And I think he can do pretty much anything he wants with it.
The right lawyering, is it?
With the right lawyering.
With the right lawyering, could Hunter Biden's attorneys claim that this was an invasion of his privacy, that there are laws, statutes that protect people's privacy, and that he was legally obligated? Could an argument be made that the owner of that repair shop was legally obligated to wipe it clean and not invade Hunter Biden's privacy?
Yeah, I think it'd be a stretch to say what he exactly couldn't do. But if you wanted to make the argument that it was still Hunter Biden's because he was physically incapable of retrieving it, yes, that's a good lawyerly thing. He has a lot of lawyers working for him now. And I imagine that this is one of many things they will seek to do.
Then this computer repairman has a hard drive, and he thinks he's seen a crime on the hard drive. If he goes to the police have reasonable suspicion now to get a judge to say, okay, the police can now, the judge says, yes, here's a warrant, search this hard drive, correct?
Yeah, you'd have to go and get a warrant.
You have to go get a warrant.
Yes. And then they can look at it.
Right.
Law enforcement can look at it.
The exclusionary rule, which has gotten weaker over the years, is a Fourth Amendment guarantee that the police cannot enter into evidence the what is it? The forbidden
fruits of a poisonous tree. Yeah.
Does that still apply?
Oh, absolutely. But you're right. It's been weakened. But I think in this case that you could certainly find judges who would say this was illegally obtained. That's the poison tree part. And therefore, anything on that hard drive cannot be admitted as evidence of a crime. Yes, I believe that you would find judges who would rule that way.
if there was a crime on that laptop and it was handed over to Rudy Giuliani, and he made a decision to bring it to the New York Post instead of the police, is he an accessory after the fact? If there is a crime on that laptop and he didn't report it to the FBI and instead took it to the New York Post to have them publish it, is he an accessory after the fact for not reporting it? Did he contaminate the chain of custody?
Well, there is this chain of custody. You have to be able to demonstrate that law enforcement that received something that's going to be used as evidence in a criminal trial, that the custody has been preserved in every step of the process. So in this analysis that you've just done, yes, I think he was under no obligation necessarily to report this to the police, but I think a good lawyer would say, well, he didn't look at it. Do we know? I don't think we know that Rudy Giuliani actually opened the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop.
It's murky. I at the top of the show, this is what I talk about. I just want to run some of this stuff past you because I'm appalled that this isn't a conversation. I think Goldman, who sits on the oversight committee, did a pretty good job explaining the murkiness.
Correct.
The investigation. And that was one of the most underreported because you had the theatrics of, but real law was not discussed. And as I pointed out, if this is so important, why wasn't Rudy Giuliani testifying? Why wasn't Steve Bannon, who was also involved in the appropriation of that hard drive? Why wasn't he testifying before Congress? This isn't about anything other than serving Donald Trump and throwing dirt into everybody's faces.
Yeah. I mean, Rudy Giuliani, to the extent that he's making any sense at all anymore, he could have said, look, I'm a lawyer, and I'm a lawyer for Donald Trump. And all I was doing was examining this hard drive to determine if there would be anything of value to my client. I think that's a stretch of the claim of privilege that might exist between Trump and Giuliani, but it's not incredible to make such an argument.
Could an argument be made that the hard drive was a campaign contribution in kind?
An in-kind contribution. Yeah, it's possible, but I think that would be stretching it to the point of...
I should have been a bad lawyer.
Yeah, well...
In fact, I should have been a bad lawyer.
You should have been a bad... But as I've said to you many times, you could be a bad preacher and get all the financial benefits that accrue to that. Here's what they should do.
So many things I could have been bad at.
Well, hey, I want to talk next week. I want to talk about what they should be investigating because it's going to take a few minutes, so we're kind of out of time.
How's the book coming?
The book is very close to publication. They are intending to publish it on April Fool's Day. And that's not a joke. It's April Fool's Day. And I expect to have within 2 weeks all the information about how you can get it and how you can download it if you have a Kindle or something. But we are seriously considering not publishing it through Amazon. I mean, not even selling it because of their horrendous anti-union busting activities. So this is a very, very honest independent press called Blue Cedar Press. It's out in Kansas.
Right.
And so it's coming. It's 3 volumes, Paid to Piss People Off. Volume 1 is peace. Volume 2 is porn. Volume 3 is prayer.
The 3 Ps.
The 3 Ps.
It sounds like me in the middle of the night. Rick, and next week we will answer a theological question from our listener, Rick. can Jesus microwave a burrito so hot that he himself cannot eat it? We'll answer that next week.
It's a good question. I'll think about, ponder it. And when I wake up in the middle of the night, I'll think of nothing but how I need to help Rick resolve that question.
Listen, I'm just grateful that I'm waking up in the middle of the night to pee. Eventually, you get to a point where you don't wake up in the middle of the night to pee.
That's true. So, very true.
Stay out of trouble, Reverend. Great job.
All right. Only good trouble. It's the only thing I get into.
It's time right now for the David Feldman Show. So get your ears on right, buckle in real tight.
Time for the professors and Marianne. Professor Marianne Cummings is a particle physicist, as well as Parks Commissioner in Aurora, Illinois. Professor Jonathan Bick teaches The Twilight Zone and Star Trek and now Columbo at office hours. We'll go over that calendar later. And Professor Adnan Hussain is chairman of the religion department over at the Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, and co-hosts Guerrilla History and the Mudgeless podcast. We'll ask you who is on that shortly. I'm going to call an audible because we need to talk about Turkey and Syria because it is so sad. I feel we should ease into it. Let's, on a cheerful note, let's start with Joe in Norway, who does ASMR for the eyeballs. What do you have before us?
Hey, David. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
We're in the heart of winter, and we've got incredible winds and cold going on right now. So I thought I'd make a hearty, spicy stew, maybe a Korean style, with tofu, some vegetables. I'll also be making some sweet rice, glutinous rice, so steam that, and then some kind of quick pickled salad to go with it.
I can't wait. I have to warn you, I have not done defensive eating before this. So let's go to Professor Bick first to talk about the State of the Union. We'll ease into it. Here's something I noticed that I have never seen a president of the United States say during a State of the Union. I don't think I've heard anybody talk about jobs that don't require a college education. Did anybody find that shocking? That during the State of the Union, I think he said it 3 times, these are good paying jobs that don't require a college education. And I thought, all right, I'm not a Biden fan, and this is just a television show. The State of the Union is just theatrics. But that was nice to hear. Anybody want to comment on that before we dig into the specifics about a president of the United States talking about good jobs that don't require a college education? What flipped that switch? Okay.
Well, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So as most people know, on Tuesday evening, President Biden gave a State of the Union address, which he is constitutionally obligated to do every year. And he focused, I'd say, primarily on economic issues and less so on cultural issues. I don't think he mentioned transgender rights, for example. And he seems to be attempting to draw working class voters back into the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party, from the 1930s to, let's be generous and say then up to the 1980s, so for half a century or so, you could say they were squarely on the side of working class Americans.
And unions.
And unions, yes.
Run by unions, sort of.
Yeah, unions had a significant say in the Democratic Party. Republicans, really, since the 1880s, have been associated with the cause of big business and the wealthy. Biden and the Democrats want to win back working class voters through the creation of hundreds of thousands of well-paid jobs that do not require a college degree. Biden said Let's offer every American the path to a good career, whether they go to college or not. And as you said, he mentioned these types of jobs without needing a college degree a number of times. And I think, one of the reasons for this is because the Democrats are starting to realize that going after only the college educated is a losing path to getting majorities in Congress or to getting a president elected, for that matter, because most Americans don't have a college degree.
Is that true? That's what?
Yeah, I think it's. Let's see. I have it later in my talk. So the last Congress passed a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, a $280 billion measure to rekindle domestic semiconductor industry, which some people have criticized, probably rightly, as a giveaway to that industry, but nonetheless, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which included $370 billion for low emission energy to combat climate change. So all of these programs have within them the potential to create these types of jobs, building infrastructure and so forth. They don't necessarily require a college degree. I would say, however, that Democrats seem to overlook the fact that it's not just that working class people want jobs. They want good paying jobs that allow them to live decent, stable lives and offer their children a chance to do better than they have. I mean, that's part of what's called the American dream, right? That your children are going to do better than you are. And that doesn't seem to be happening these days. So what's missing from work is really the quality of the job: time off, vacation, reasonable working hours, good working conditions, respect and dignity for the worker. That seems to be missing. We have a lot of jobs at the moment, but we don't have those types of jobs much of the time. So for decades, the Democratic Party has been abandoning the concerns of the working class and appealing to the college educated, considering that, most Americans don't have a 4-year degree. That's not the best strategy.
And they're in debt.
And they're in debt to get those degrees.
Right.
That's a newer phenomenon. Another mistake by Democrats and Republicans, but so about 2/3 of eligible voters do not have 4-year college degrees. 2/3.
Wow.
And I
did not know that. 2/3 of eligible voters
do not have a 4-year college degree or better. Yeah.
Okay.
Democrats have lost ground over the last decade, even among those with the 4-year degree or better. In 2020, Biden won 61% of college graduates, but only 45% of voters without a 4-year college degree, and just 33% of white voters without a 4-year degree. In a New York Times Siena College poll that was conducted in September before the last election, 59% of white working class voters said Republicans were the party of the working class. 59% of white working class voters, compared with 28% who said the Democrats were.
Can I respond to that for a second?
Yeah.
If you have these hyper-credentialed professional managerial class holes in the Democratic Party constantly saying the solution is education, 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 and you don't have a formal education, you're going to think, and almost rightfully so, that the Republican Party there's more of a home for me, that they look down on me in the Democratic Party because I didn't go into $100,000 debt to get a college degree. It makes sense.
Well, it makes sense in that the Republicans are seen as the only other choice to the Democrats because we have a two-party system that really strangles the idea of democracy. We don't have a lot of choice when it comes to who to elect.
But it's almost blaming, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it is almost like blaming the victim. That's what the Clintons and the Obamas do. They blame the American. You didn't work hard enough in school. You didn't get the degree, so you lose. And the Republicans don't say that.
It was a terrible strategy. I agree with you 100%. But the idea that the Republican Party is the party of the working class is nonetheless ludicrous. Republicans have always opposed unions, and they've been instrumental in reducing unionization in this country from about a third of the private workforce down to about 6%. This has been devastating for the working class in terms of working conditions, wages, job stability, and benefits, and the power they have in the market, in the job market, that is, and whatever say they have in the workplace has been annihilated because they're not in a union. But as you rightly point out, the Democratic Party had the only positive thing they've really provided unions and working people is rhetoric and small, highly targeted policies that are not changing the power dynamic between employers and employees. Democrats have promised for decades to help unions, make it easier for unionization to occur. Clinton did this. Obama did this. Biden did this. But they just promised it. They never delivered on it.
And union membership, all-time low, or the lowest in 100 years. We keep hearing about Starbucks. We keep hearing about Amazon. Union membership continues to drop.
Yes. Yeah. And again, 68% of the the white working class voters said that they agreed more with Republicans than Democrats on the economy, while just 25% said they agreed with the Democrats more. Beyond economics, white working class voters sided overwhelmingly with Republicans on building a border wall, opposing gun control, stopping illegal immigration, and seeing gender as an immutable and determined at birth. So let's take a look at those four issues, right? Only one of those could possibly result in an improvement in employment prospects or an improvement in their economic situation. Maybe you could argue that reducing illegal immigration could, make it better for them in terms of not lowering wages for jobs that they may be pursuing, or, losing out to someone who is here without proper documentation getting a job. But the other three issues will not result in an improvement to the working class's economic situation in any way. Building a border wall, it won't even do what it's supposedly said it's going to do. Most people come here and overstay their visa. That's how they end up here, quote unquote, illegally. Opposing gun control, that has nothing to do with economics of the working class. And the gender issues and transgender issues, again, not relevant to the working class's economic situation unless they happen to be transgender. So they're looking at the wrong things. They're being distracted by the Republican Party and these types of issues. And Democrats have problems not only with the working class, but I'm sorry. The Democratic problems with the working class are not limited to white voters. Some blue-collar Black, Latino, and Asian American voters have drifted toward the Republicans recently. And so Biden rolled out a number of economic programs aimed at these people who are more sensitive to rising prices. So he talked about lowering insulin costs. He talked about getting rid of junk fees, such as exorbitant bank overdraft charges, credit card late fees, hotel junk fees, and cable junk fees, et cetera, which is fine. Okay, but that's, even if you did that, it's not going to change the economic position of the working class. I'm all for those things, but it's small potatoes in the big scheme of things. Now, what do the Republicans want to cut? I was very happy that Biden came out and said we're not going to cut Social Security or Medicare. And he said to the Republicans, do you agree with that? Stand up if you agree, that we're not going to cut Social Security, because he said that some Republicans were proposing that, which they were. Rick Scott of Florida, what's this guy from Utah, Romney. Romney came, with this plan for a blue ribbon commission in order to cut the deficit, et cetera. And clearly that's what he has in mind. But the Republicans were like, oh, no, us? We wouldn't do that. So he got them to stand up and say they weren't going to advocate for cutting those. Okay, but what do they want to cut? Now, yesterday, the Republicans on the House Budget Committee gave us a preview. And this is part of a deal to raise the debt ceiling. They want to cut food aid for low-income families, which is already meager, right? We don't. People in need in this country still have to go to food banks, even if they get food aid from the government. Climate justice, they want to take money away from that. Electric vehicle funding and incentives, they want to cut that. Student debt relief, that's the big one that they want to go after. And the Affordable Care Act subsidies, they want to cut those way back. So they want to cut health care. They want to make it harder for students to get a college education or a vocational education. They want to make it harder to do anything about global warming. And they want to cut back on food aid for desperate people. That's what they want to do. So that's about $780 billion in proposed spending cuts, nearly half of which would come from revising President Biden's student debt cancellation, a plan, as you mentioned earlier, that is currently blocked pending a decision from the Supreme Court. But, saying we're not going to forgive a small amount of student debt is not going to result in that debt being paid necessarily, because there are going to be a lot of defaults. Students have not been paying interest or principal on these loans for a few years now. And to say all of a sudden, oh, you have to pay everything now, that's going to put a lot of people into default. And those loans a portion of those loans are not going to be paid back anyway. So it's not really saving money. And in the case of cutting back on the Affordable Care Act subsidies, first of all, I want Medicare Plus for all, right? I want a national healthcare system that gets rid of deductibles, copays, and all this. But if we can't have that right now, and we have a subsidized Obamacare, then we should keep the subsidies in place. They want to reduce the subsidies to people that are at 400% of the federal poverty line or lower, which would hurt a lot of middle income people that pay for coverage. So, for example, a 60-year-old man making $55,000 this year pays 8.5% of his income on a silver plan. Without the subsidies, he'd pay over 20% of his income. 20% of your income just for health insurance premiums. That's a lot. So those are the people they want to hurt. The poor, the middle class, and the working class. That's the Republican Party friend of the working class for you.
Yep.
That's what I've got.
Yep. Great job. Anybody want to respond to that?
Yeah, terrible. Like the Democrats had an excellent opportunity to push as hard to the left, or I would say to the correct position that would help most Americans when they had all the power for the last 2 years, and they refuse. So everything Professor John has just gone through is absolutely true of the Republican Party, completely enabled by the Democratic Party. When the Democratic Party keeps pushing the leftward allowed parameters of these discussions, they've pushed off Medicare for all. There was no mention of even like a public option. Yes, they subsidized Obamacare, but I saw my deductibles go up to a point where, unless I would only go to a hospital if I was completely unconscious. That's kind of the situation I find myself in.
Yeah, it's unconscionable.
And it's like, it's so, all these things. Yeah, Republicans, bad, bad, bad. And the Democrats are almost, at least the Democratic leadership is secretly on board with all this stuff. Let's take Social Security. I mean, not to mention that Biden has been for cutting Social Security all of his political life. I mean, he appointed to the Social Security Oversight Board this guy, I think his name was Biggs, a guy that is a lifelong, and if you can go to The Lever, that's David Sirota's publication, and he will tell you everything about this guy. A vocal critic of expanded Social Security and workers' rights. And he has dismissed the retirement crisis, quote, as a non-issue. And recently, as 2020 blamed problems with Social Security on, quote, older Americans' game of chicken. That sounds like colorful. Yeah, what does that mean?
Like living longer with less
well, that
money?
basically they're saying that maybe he's implying that older people are almost blackmailing politicians. You take away our Social Security and we won't vote for you, kind of thing.
All right.
2 decades ago, Biggs worked on Bush administration commission that pushed to privatize Social Security. And we know what Monica Lewinsky scandal prevented. So go ahead, hey, David.
Well, let's talk about the weaponization of the government. Jim Jordan is chairing hearings about how the FBI has been weaponized. So how I guess he's going to get to the bottom of the persecution of Muslims by the FBI?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Although I will say, why don't we hear a coherent outcry? There are Democrats on this board. We should be hearing something from them about this issue.
Well, tell me what's going on with the FBI.
Okay, so what's going on with the FBI is that it turns out that there was, in Denver, there was a coalition, Black Lives Matter and other racial justice coalitions that were getting together, protesting, like everyone else was that summer. And this group, though, had a particularly interesting member. His name is Windecker. Now, let's see if I can get up this. Turns out this guy, Windecker, was a paid informant by the FBI, was paid to start encouraging members of this Denver coalition to act up and, file intelligence reports and try to get dirt on some of the activists that they were targeting. And it turns out the FBI was targeting hundreds and hundreds of activists, of Black Lives Matter people, all through the summer and fall of 2020. But, and by the way, if you want to read about this in full detail, person that's been on the show, Trevor Aronson of The Intercept, he was the one that has covered the FBI's counter-terrorism program that targeted isolated, mostly mentally troubled young Muslim men and tried to entrap them in schemes that FBI informants themselves made up. That sound familiar? Same with the guys that were plotting to kidnap Whitmore. The plan was actually hatched by FBI informants. And they managed to finally nail the ringleader, who the court even, and the prosecution even admitted was a mentally ill person. So, but this time it was a little different. Okay, so I guess, as I said before, FBI has got to check off those affirmative action check boxes and go back to what they really want to do, is go after African Americans and their allies organizing, on behalf against police violence. Now, this is nothing new, but there was an interesting quote from the FBI, one of the secretary or the assistant director of the FBI, and and he thought I'm trying to look for the quote right now, but he regarded all the Black Lives Matter protests as another 9/11. Really, he regarded that the, you know,
I mean, 9/11,
rather 9/11. This was another 9/11.
September 11th.
Assault on, you know, America. And that's how we regarded all the largely spontaneous, but very well organized, and might I add, very peaceful demonstrations. So here it is. As protests broke out in cities like Minneapolis, Denver, Portland, Oregon, and all over, the FBI's second in command, David Bowditch, compared the demonstrations to the 9/11 attacks. When 9/11 occurred, this is his quote, "Our folks did not quibble about whether there was danger ahead for them," Bowditch wrote in a memo first obtained by the New York Times. They ran head-on into peril. Bowditch describes the racial justice demonstrations throughout the country as, quote, "a national crisis," unquote, whose, quote, "violent protesters," unquote, were highly organized. Really. So in rushes this guy. This Windecker is actually a white guy. When I was reading this article, looking at his pictures online, I'm going, God, he reminded me of the guy who was at Sean Decker, Tanya Harding's bodyguard, because he claimed to be like, you know, he was a veteran of the French Foreign Legion and worked with the Peshmerga and was in Iraq. Well, apparently he actually was in Iraq, but even when his fellow soldiers were interviewed, they said, yeah, that guy is, you know, kind of a real jerk and is really filled with himself. And so you get somebody like this guy who is, you know, primed to see himself as, you know, a real go-getter, you know, somebody who gets to the core of things that might be threatening America, and you know, shades of COINTELPRO, right? I think everybody knows what COINTELPRO here was, but that was a program, and I don't know if it was started by Richard Nixon, but it certainly was beefed up under Richard Nixon, where the FBI would infiltrate the Black Panthers, the American Indian movement, the peace movements, you know, all kinds of things that threatened America, you know, that basically people who were speaking out against the injustices of their government and their country. And, you know, so that was the Senate committee, it was the Church Committee, I think in the 1970s, was investigating this. And so there was a whole bunch of reforms that the FBI supposedly put in place, you know, after the Church Committee's recommendation. But, you know, reforms are only so good as the enforcement mechanisms in place and the culture of the organizations. And, you know, since 9/11, you know, there has been a much more, I would say radicalized, but much more law and order, national security state type culture tolerated even among Democrats. And I think especially among Democrats, it's become kind of toxic because the left is supposed to be opposing this kind of stuff. And, you know, if this becomes, none of what Trevor Anderson had reported really broke national press. I mean, the story of the Whitmore kidnapping was sensational because, you know, it fed into the narratives of the time that, and the anti-Trump stuff going on the Democratic Party. But, you know, when I started reading about it, I went, holy crap, this story isn't what it seems like at all. But that's gone away because now the top guy is in jail. So, but this one really should, because as I said before, you know, and you've heard me several times, every Black Lives Matter protest that my organization, Progressives of Kane County, or myself, I was involved in, was very, very peaceful. What had broke out, all the looting and trashing and fires downtown Aurora, just a few miles from where I live or not a few blocks from where I live right now, was all some people that called themselves Antifa, but they had no connection whatsoever with the people who were very peacefully protesting that day.
Right.
And I was beginning to suspect that there's something going on, that there's just too many of these incidents that are unfortunately smearing the Black Lives Matter protests.
Right.
With this brush.
Well,
anyway.
Yeah, we should. Professor Hussein has anyway. Let's turn to Turkey and Syria. There was a massive earthquake, 20,000 people, I believe, and counting, in Turkey and Syria. 16,000 dead that we know of in Turkey. 6,400 buildings collapsed. I think Erdogan called it the worst natural disaster of the past 100 years. I know that you visit Turkey all the time, Professor Hussein, and
Yeah, I think he's right that it is the worst. It's interesting. They're about to celebrate the centenary of the Turkish Republic. And so that 100 years is kind of meaningful, that this is probably the biggest disaster to hit modern Turkey. It eclipses, I think we'll see. The totals are not in, and we'll see how much the death toll and injured and devastation go up. Over the next few days, but it seems to eclipse even the 1999 major earthquake that did affect part of the major city of Istanbul. So in a more populous area, perhaps. But the devastation here is just so wide. Words are really probably inadequate to express the scale and shocking devastation. Many people probably have seen some of these incredibly dramatic and horrific videos of buildings just collapsing. And this happened across 10.
How many weeks ago were you there?
Oh, I was there in the summer, so it's been a few months. But I'm actually planning on visiting in May, and it's going to be a very interesting situation. That's also about the time that the elections are scheduled currently. That's a whole other question and issue politically, the consequences of this, which we can talk about in a minute. But just to say that, this is the southern part of Turkey, along the border of Syria. This area is actually unseasonably cold right now. In one of the major cities that was devastated, Malatya, it was -8 Celsius, and it's about 18 degrees Fahrenheit. So the people who have lost their homes, so that we're talking about the survivors now. There's a secondary, major crisis that is happening as a result of this natural disaster, is the, fact that so many people are homeless. Gas lines have been cut off for fear of explosion. And so a lot of people are living without heat, electricity, potable water for several days. You could see, if the situation isn't dramatically reversed for the survivors and aid brought to them, that there could be large scale, deaths to exposure, hunger, diseases from lack of sanitation. And so the consequences of this could be truly horrific. We're really only totaling up now the deaths from the collapse of these buildings. But we don't know the full scale ultimately. And this was a pretty big earthquake. I'm from California, grew up in California. So, I feel like I know earthquakes a little bit. I was there during the Loma Prieta earthquake that brought down part of the Bay Bridge. And, the highway extension in Oakland that, was an elevated highway extension that collapsed and crushed cars underneath. And of course, that caused quite a lot of damage, ultimately, several $1 billion worth of damage. But the loss of life is, in the scores. And that was a big earthquake. That was a scary, frightening earthquake. If you think about a place like Turkey, where construction standards and materials and some of the rapid construction that was done in some of these kind of provincial cities and so on over the last 15, 20 years, it really becomes very serious when you think about how a 7.8, the Loma Prieta was a 6.9. This was a 7.8 earthquake on the Richter scale. And then it was followed, and this happened at 4 a.m. or so in the morning. So everybody's sleeping at home, which is another, factor in increasing, the severity of the consequences and the death toll and fatalities. And then it's followed up 8 hours, 10, 12 hours later by a major second, earthquake at 7.5. So this is really devastating. And I think it's going to have a lot of consequences for Turkey. And the most immediate ones, of course, that everyone's thinking about are politically, because there have been concerns about the speed of the disaster response by the Turkish government. Let's recall and remember, this is the heartland and core, you might say, the kind of central and southern Anatolian population, provincial population that is the sort of core of Erdogan's base. I mean, he has, of course, been a masterful politician and put together various kinds of coalitions, and those kinds of coalitions have shifted, over the course of the last 20 years in which he's been leader of the government. But that has remained a solid base of support throughout, which is the kind of Anatolian heartlanders who are outside of the really big cities and have their kind of, he appeals to the simple populism of their concerns and has put a lot of money and investment in trying to extend state services and state institutions into these areas that never had things like universities. So a lot of these provincial towns, he's established universities so that they could have, higher education to a greater standard and not have to go to Istanbul or Ankara, the capital city, and leave their families. And often, of course, if you think about it, that's expensive for poorer families to send, a child, to go live in another city and so on. So he did things like that. There were a lot of huge infrastructure projects, airports, regional airports that were built in these places like Hatay, which is in Iskenderun along the Mediterranean coast, just north of Syria, and is actually kind of disputed. Syria claims that it's part of its territory. But so he's invested in these kind of big infrastructure projects, rapid housing, developed apartment blocks built in the last 20 years to provide more affordable housing in these kinds of towns and cities. Police stations, all kinds of stuff. And one thing that's so concerning is that a lot, they can't get aid into some of these places because the airports have been thoroughly damaged, the runways damaged. Some of these, buildings, have collapsed. So it really doesn't look good for the state to have invested and with what kind of standards. I mean, Erdogan's government, the AKP party, basically came into power after the 1999 earthquake as part of this response against the corruption of building standards, the delay of the state to actually, deal with the disaster and so on. So AKP was looked to as a kind of good government. They will be sincere. They care about us, the people, this kind of populist orientation. And that was, what it was predicated on. So politically, a big disaster like the 1999 earthquake changed Turkey's political future. The question is now, despite the fact that Erdogan has managed to weather all kinds of challenges and has a very divided opposition against him, will this, these circumstances really undermine the confidence that people have in the Turkish state and in their government? Because there were supposed to be all new kinds of standards in building after the 1999 earthquake. There was a special tax instituted that some economists believe over the last 20 years or so would have totaled about $3.8 billion, dollars worth of dedicated specifically for disaster relief. So the fact that it was somewhat slow, I mean, this was a huge earthquake. It's not going to be perfect, but a lot of people feel that, the first 24 hours is absolutely crucial for saving as many people as possible. You can, usually rescue 74% of people under, rubble if they haven't been, crushed by the rubble. But if they're just trapped under the rubble, usually 74% of survivors can be rescued in the first 24 hours. It was very important that happened. The army wasn't called up in massive amounts, in the first initial hours. People were wondering, where's the big machinery to lift? People were volunteering, but there was no way for them to really do anything effective because the equipment wasn't there. And of course, everybody in a disaster, in a moment like this, wants it to happen immediately. And of course, there are infrastructural considerations, but this is supposed to have been prepared for. 1999 was 17,000 people died. So this is going to be really interesting to see, how the political effects and consequences, quite beyond all of the, economic devastation and so on. But the elections happening only 3 months in the future.
Is Erdogan running for re-election? Or
Well, yes, he is. He is running for re-election, and it's really this could be a really big blow, to his political fortunes and chances. So we'll have to see, what that. What will happen as a result of this. The only other component that I want to talk about, since I focus mostly there on Turkey, is just to say that the situation is even more dire, of course, in Syria, because we're talking about a country that's been devastated by an ongoing civil war, that's fragmented, that doesn't have effective governance in a lot of the areas that are closest to the Turkish border up in the north and northwest part of Syria that were were hardest hit. Some of these are the last rebel kind of controlled territories. And these are people who are already refugees, and a lot of them are already refugees, and it's just absolutely devastating. What I cannot abide, however, is the fact that the Syrian government is still under sanctions. These sanctions have prevented the coordination and facilitation of relief through the most obvious mechanisms that are available of state institutions that have access. I just read a report that today, the first real convoy of aid came into northern Syria, crossing the Turkish border. This is 3-4 days, on. And the reason why is because, of course, the area on the other side of the Turkish border is devastated by the earthquake. And the Turkish authorities are obviously making a high priority of dealing with the immediate, rescue operations in the 10 provinces that they are dealing with. The fact that the aid has to go through Turkey because the U.S. government, other Western governments will not send the aid through Syria, through the Syrian government, is just absolutely shocking. And so I do not, accept any of the State Department and this government's statements about how much they care for the people and the crocodile tears if you are not willing to do what's necessary to save human lives for the sake of pursuing politics, of regime change. That's what it's all about. And so instead, of, when this has been raised with them about why can't you just lift the sanctions, or why can't you work with the Syrian government in order to facilitate aid going as quickly as possible to those who need it. The U.S. administration has said that it's going to continue to do the kind of aid operations it has always done in the past with in the Syrian territories. It's not going to work with the Syrian government, and floating all kinds of concerns and complaints about Syria using, the humanitarian disaster as a way to extend its influence into areas that are held by rebels, and raising concerns that the Syrian government will, possibly drain away, and redirect aid, that should go to these people. I mean, this is just the most absurd kind of, set of concerns. Luckily, a lot of other countries are violating the U.S. sanctions and, sending aid directly. And many of them are countries that are under sanctions themselves. So Iran has sent a lot of aid, Cuba, Venezuela. So what we see is, a really intolerable situation, to watch the poorest, countries that are already themselves under sanction being the ones who show the most solidarity with the needs of the Syrians by sending aid as quickly as possible through whatever channels are needed. And so I would say that we should really be putting pressure on the U.S. government to lift its sanctions, to stop punishing the Syrian people for, the regime that they have. Those are the only effective institutions that are available to save these people. And it's very interesting. I read the statement by the foreign ministry spokesperson from China, who just made all of the points that need to be said, which is that, pointing out the U.S.'s frequent military strikes and harsh economic sanctions have caused huge civilian casualties. As we speak, U.S. troops continue to occupy Syria's principal oil-producing regions. They have plundered more than 80% of Syria's oil production and smuggled and burned Syria's grain stock. All this has made Syria's humanitarian crisis even worse. In the wake of the catastrophe, the U.S. should put aside geopolitical obsessions and immediately lift the unilateral sanctions on Syria to unlock the doors for humanitarian aid to Syria. This is an official spokesperson from the Chinese foreign ministry. This is like that, this is solidarity. This is the real truth of what's going on.
Right.
And, I just have to highlight that the absurdity and the tyranny and heartlessness of the situation. And I remember that during COVID, when, Iran was one of the early hotspots, and they didn't have access to medicines, ventilators, all kinds of, treatments, and basic, medical supplies because of U.S. sanctions. And there were calls at that time also to lift sanctions on Iran, and the Trump government refused to do so and maintained its maximum pressure policy. What is the difference between the Biden administration on these kinds of issues from the Trump, from the Trump administration?
We're giving, did I read aid, like something like less than $100 million in aid?
Yeah, and I read, that's at least something. I read also that
that's like,
the European Union was going to send 3.5 million euros. It's like, what are you talking about?
Did he mention it? When was the earthquake? Was it before the State of the Union?
Yeah, I think. Well, wasn't it on Monday morning?
And he didn't.
It was
mention
Monday
it.
morning in Turkey, which would have been, So it was even earlier for us. It was like late Sunday night.
He didn't mention it during the State of the Union.
Well, why would you? It's politically unimportant, for the purposes of this, political speech to the American electorate.
Well, Turkey was instrumental, as you've been teaching us, in orchestrating peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, and watching the devastation I thought about what you had said about Erdogan trying to bring peace to that region and how we can't wait to send weapons to Ukraine to create the situation that we see in Syria and Turkey.
Yeah, I mean, let's hope that the one good thing that could come out of this is perhaps some resolution of the Syrian, crisis. But that's exactly why we need to be making appeals for a humanitarian perspective and approach. Let's end the suffering of the Syrian people. Lift these sanctions, encourage negotiations, try and have a regional solution. So that this nightmare that the Syrian people have been experiencing for the last decade, basically, can end and they can live some normal, human lives. That should be, I think, the top priority.
We are the least generous.
The consequences of the earthquake.
America is, in terms of percentage of our GDP, we are the least generous nation in the industrialized world when it comes to foreign aid.
But what's interesting is that politically, people have this misimpression that vast sums of the U.S. budget go to foreign aid, and that it's basically like, they're the global welfare queens are living it up on U.S. largesse. This is the American kind of perspective on it, but Americans, are also charitable people. Even if they don't want their government spending their money for good purposes, they will often do it themselves, out of sympathy and compassion. So, if you do want to, provide aid, Rahima has established, Rahima Foundation has established a special Turkey earthquake disaster relief fund. And, my mother has lots of, good contacts, and, we'll make sure that it gets to people who need it. I think also People's Forum has got a fundraiser, and they have also contacts to groups, on the ground in Turkey and northern Syria. You could also donate through them. So the People's Forum also. So take your pick, but I hope people will do what the U.S. government won't, and that is actually have a heart and try and help folks out.
Well, thank you. The best way to support is through rahima.org, RAHIMA.org, and we should talk about. Well, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Professor Marianne Cummings, Professor Jonathan Beck, Professor Adnan Hussein. Everybody go to rahima.org and donate, please. Thank you. Joe in Norway.
Yes, sir.
That looks amazing. What did you do?
If you'd bear with me one moment. Just in time.
Oh, my God. That is absolutely gorgeous. Just beautiful.
Nice spicy stew with soybean base, fermented soybean paste. And I've got tofu, potato, carrot, celery, squash, leeks.
Wow.
And I made some sticky rice, glutinous rice. So it's very chewy. And then I quick pickled chayote squash and carrots with sesame and rice vinegar.
Wow. That is spectacular. And
breakfast time.
That makes a great breakfast. And it reminds us all to give to rahima.org. That is beautiful. Office hours. What do we have scheduled for office hours?
Steve Kay is going to be showing some of his art project, 1-minute videos. And Annika will be presenting a talk, which is still ironing out. We also have, of course, Professor John as well with the Twilight Zone. And then we have a couple free spots in the evening or later on. So
fantastic. Thank you so much. Joe in Norway. If you want to thank this show, the best way is to go to rahima.org. Thank you.
It's time right now for the David Feldman Show. So get your ears on right, buckle in.